So the astrology of the week of 18 April 2022 through 24 April 2022 brings us to the precipice of eclipse season, right to the edge where we're now kind of fully giving over into eclipse season after this week. It's a waning moon cycle, waning into this solar eclipse here, which will be next week. And so, yeah, I mean, we're contemplating, I think, this week, the nature of reality, the nature of change, the nature of life. These kind of fundamental constructions that make up reality are brought to the fore as eclipse season is going to be heralded in very, very, very soon. So let's dive in here to the charts. Let's look at the transits and charts this week. My name's S.J. Anderson. Welcome to my channel. Every week I dive into the astrology here on this channel, and I look at configurations, transits, ingresses, all kinds of astrological phenomena to try to distill some themes for the week, give you some information that you can take with you as you move through your week, and hopefully find it useful, inspirational, just situating, you know, that you can use the information to situate yourself and your life, you know, find meaning, right? The great search for meaning that we're all on, and astrology is that great tool for meaning, for context, for trying to understand these mysteries of life, the greater mysteries of why we're here, who we are, what the hell this even is, you know. Astrology can provide a symbolic overlay that allows us to explore those things and hopefully, you know, be able to get through our days that much better and that much easier. So let's just jump right in. I'm looking here at the charts this week. I've got three themes. And the first theme is this Sagittarius Moon, this great Sagittarius Moon that comes this week. We're preparing for eclipse season, which by its nature, eclipse season is a search for greater truth. It's a fissure of truth that moves into the reality and cracks us open. Much to our consternation often, but that's what eclipse season, that's how I find it to be. And Sagittarius is a sign that has some similar tones in terms of going out. It's a fire sign, right? We're out searching and exploring. It's the fire sign of change. And that's what eclipse seasons do. They change us and they change reality, like I said. And so this Sagittarius Moon, I think, is a great opportunity, will be my transit of the week to prepare for eclipse season, which will thrust us even deeper into this kind of truth search, let's say. Second big theme or story this week is that the sun will enter Taurus. And this is one of the markers of the beginnings of eclipse season, when you have the sun now in the sign where it will be eclipsed by the moon, and that where it will participate in the syzygy, right? 2 points as they align, and then the third is the earth. This alignment of points is classically what a syzygy means. But when you have syzygies near the lunar nodes, the path of the earth, the path of the sun rather, the ecliptic, and then the lunar path, when those are the nodes, when the lunar path crosses the ecliptic, when you have syzygies near those nodes, bodies block each other out. And that's what an eclipse is. It's the blocking out of one body by another, and from the vantage point of a third. And so we have here this eclipse season that's the sun is now in place. The piece of the sun in Taurus is in place. That's where the sun will be for both of these eclipses. So it's maybe one way to define the beginning of an eclipse season. And it also begins spring's mid-phase. So that happens on Wednesday. The sun will enter Taurus, 4:20 Central European time. We have the moon coming into Sagittarius on Tuesday, about 24 hours before the sun enters Taurus. And that's going to be at, again, 4:16 in the morning Central European time. So it's this Tuesday, Wednesday, moon into Sagittarius, transit of the week, sun into Taurus on Wednesday, the whole piece into place of eclipses. And then finally we have Mercury. My third story will be Mercury squaring Saturn, and this is going to set up really a several weeks square. We're already in it now with Mercury square Saturn. It perfects this week on the 24th, on Sunday at 3:30, 3:49 actually to be precise in Central Europe. But it's Taurus Aquarius, and the square is between these two fixed signs that define eclipse season, because all of eclipse season, you will have the Saturn in Aquarius squaring both eclipses. And you'll have a big pileup now emerging into Taurus, where Saturn plays this role, this almost, in a way, a central role because of the nature of the dynamic aspect, which is the square. And Saturn is just hanging out there reminding us, hey, I'm still here. Don't ignore me. I'm part of this great season of change. Okay, so what else is here before I jump off of this slide that we can talk about? I love the Mercury-Venus sextile. That happens right out of the gate this week, hours from where I am now, at 3:09 in the morning, Central European time. I would have liked to talk about that. It's just with my release schedule, I didn't get out ahead of this. But this sets up the Taurus Pisces sextiles that also define this whole season of eclipses that we're in. And I think that can be easygoing, talking about the changes, talking about what's going on in your life, talking about how you're feeling right now. Do you feel good? Is it pleasurable? Is it nice? What are the obstacles? What are the difficulties? Where are you dislodged? Mercury, Venus can very much be that. Music, playing music, writing music, singing, verbalizing, sweetly to people around you. There's a very nice aspect here, this sextile between Mercury and Venus. We have Mercury conjoining the North Node on Saturday at 6:27 here in Central Europe. I think this just, again, ramps up eclipse season. We now have a traditional planet making a conjunction to that North Node, the first of a series of these planets that will do so. Mars will in August. Venus will much sooner than that. The Sun and Mercury, those 4 planets, will be conjoining, or will conjoin this North Node. But this kind of sets up the eclipses. And we have, again, talking about your eclipse story. I would get into that this week. Verbalization of what's happening in your life. What are the dynamic changes that you're undergoing now? And if you know your chart, where are those nodes in your chart? And what house axis is that? And how is that developing around those house topics? Doing analysis, thought writing, all of those mercurial topics around those changes, I think, are greatly supported this week as Mercury comes closer to conjoin this North Node. Here, Rahu on Sunday, 16:27, like I said. And so those are the other things going on. It's a cool week, a lot of Mercury, right? A lot of thinking, writing, analysis, communication that might be in store for us this week. And I love having that. Again, on the cusp of these kind of profound, often ineffable moments that come with eclipses. These are things where we just stand in the awe of reality. Sometimes life takes over and just sucks us and pulls us, and there's nothing we can do except just to enjoy the ride, stand in the awe. And so to have Mercury here activated, I think it helps us at least articulate somewhat, at least try to get some language wrapped around what's happening. And that can always be quite useful. So, but yeah, again, Mercury, and I was tweeting about this yesterday, Mercury is also a trickster, right? It's the deceiving planet. Deception as a strategy, or trickery, maybe as a vice. And so you may want to watch, I always tell people this, as we enter eclipse season, wear life like a loose garment. The ideas, the thoughts, the words that are forming now, they may shift and change and alter in 3 weeks' time. So it's good to keep that in mind. But sometimes Mercury will give us things we need just for that next step. And I think it's always good to practice articulation, even though it might not be true very soon after the moment of something being articulated. So those are the 3 major stories. What's the moon? Again, we have that Sag moon. This is actually a really strange week for lunar transits. We just passed through this amazing cycle for electional astrologers. I saw so many cool projects being launched. Podcasts, my friends launching podcasts out there, you know who you are. Excellent podcasts that were being launched. I saw books being launched. Those friends, you know who you are. I saw all kinds of, those are the 2 kind of main big projects that I saw launched, but they took advantage of this. Courses that some of my astrological friends were launching, my astrologer friends. So, the things us astrologers do, courses, books, podcasts, a lot of those got launched during this last waxing cycle. And I was trying to hype it up as much as I could, encourage you all to get out there and get moving and activate your kind of initiations of all kinds. So I'm glad to see many, many people did that. Now we're at a whole different phase. It's integration and rest, preparing for the eclipses to come take over. And but this week you have a Sagittarius moon square Mars. You've got the moon fallen in Capricorn, fallen in Capricorn. And then you got the moon with Saturn in Aquarius. So all rough moons this week. There's a rough edge to the whole of the lunar transits this week. I guess we start out with the Scorpio moon that we're in now, that moon that's fallen in Scorpio, exiled in Capricorn, to get technical, but it's damaged, right? It's a moon that's struggling with Mars and with Saturn. And it's interesting to note, both of the moon signs of debility, so of fall and exile, are with malefic planets, Mars and Saturn. And I think this is part of why malefic planets are malefic, right? The moon is the kind of fundament of the self, the body, the comfort, the nurture. And so Mars and Saturn run counter to that. And it's one way to define why they are malefic is because the moon, the fundamental part of the body and the self, this kind of physicality, struggles with these two energies of dynamic change, dynamic force of Mars, and of cold separation and kind of restriction that Saturn brings. So anyhow, that's just an aside. But this week is a challenge for the moon, and so we're going to look for opportunities. The Sagittarius moon is what I picked. I think it's the best opportunity during that week. All right, let's move on to the first side. First chart is the 20th of April, Wednesday here, 2246, right here in the Western Balkans, Central European time. I've got the Sagittarius moon. Let's talk about it a little bit more deeply now. The thing about it, I wanted to put the late degrees of Sagittarius are maybe ideal. And there's a dance here because on the one hand, astrologers like earlier degree moon transits because the moon will likely be aspecting other planets. Contemporary or more modern systems talk about the modern void of course moon, where if the moon does not make an aspect before it leaves the sign, then we should do nothing. I'm not a subscriber to that as much because I'm not sure what the genesis of it is. I think it's more of a contemporary thing, but it happens all the time. I mean, if you would be inept or ineffectual a lot of the time. I think that for me, I'm more interested in the rulerships of the moon and the aspects the moon is making as a way to define it. But you can even see here, like in Sagittarius, the moon is in the terms of Saturn and the terms of Mars. So for this chart that I picked, you have a moon in the Egyptian terms of Saturn. Maybe less ideal. In this case, the Saturn is making that sextile, and Saturn is strong. So maybe there's something about this Saturn that can support the moon without being dynamically configured to it. But it's less ideal. The problem with the earlier degrees is that you're having to navigate around this Mars, which is now in Pisces, and that would be a square from Mars, which is very, very something to be avoided, generally speaking. You know, sometimes you see in older textbooks, in electional textbooks, it's like, if you want the opposite, then do the opposite. So if you were trying to mess your life up or do something to harm, I don't really even like to talk about this stuff because I have this whole theory that the kind of dark forces, let's say, they are running on inverse astrological rules. So instead of working with the benefics or malefics, the malefics or benefics, and you would elect things like the worst charts, that's what you would elect for to kind of do your evil, so-called, in the world. Just a theory. But in this case, maybe you would elect for something martial to really do some damage if you wanted that square from Mars. But just to come back, I like to find good energy that's less affected by Mars and Saturn, and it's the smoother energy on traditional electional astrological rules from Brotheus, from Hephaestion, and others. And you would want to avoid this square from Mars. And where are your options though this week, right? Moon in Scorpio, Moon in Capricorn, those are usually a no-go unless you're really forced to do it. Like if Mars and Saturn, like in 2016, Mars and Saturn were piled up here in Sagittarius for so long together. Maybe you would avoid that. You could pick a Cap moon or an Aquarius moon or something like this. But so to come back here, we're trying to navigate around the Mars problem. And so you're sacrificing these later degrees of Sagittarius, or you're sacrificing, by embracing these later degrees of Sagittarius, you make a sacrifice, right? You abandon these earlier degrees where you have Jupiter and Venus ruling these Egyptian terms, but you're squaring that Mars. So what the other big benefit in this chart of these later degrees of Sagittarius, this is not a void of course moon, actually. This moon is applying to Jupiter. And so if you get these late degrees of Sagittarius, you actually get aspects to Venus and Jupiter, which is huge. I mean, that's one thing when you go read the older text, they're like, look, if this chart is bad, If you have a bad electional chart, just make sure the benefics are aspecting things. Put the benefics, like I did here, put them in the 4th house, right? They square the ascendant by sign. Venus is 6 degrees from the ascendant, but they witness is the key. They're witnessing the ascendant, they're witnessing the moon. And that's why this to me is the best chart of the week. So let me come back, or, one of the top charts of the week. And I think that this Venus-Jupiter co-presence, again, it comes back, and let me go to my next slide. This energy, active truth, what has Jupiter and Pisces moved you to do? That's what I want you to consider this week. That's what I want you to think about this week. We're in the final phase of Jupiter and Pisces. It's going to come to an end here very fast. I always say it's going to be here like this when I talk to clients, or when in videos, you'll hear me say that sometimes. Look, this transit I'm talking about in 2 years, it's here already. It's actually already here, I like to tell people. Get ready for it. Especially big transits like to the 10th house or 7th house. These big angular transits. Sometimes I like to act as if they're already here because they're going to be here so fast. How do you prepare for those topics? And so you're ready for them when they dynamically activate. But we're here now in the final moments. And then the other side of that is when we're in a transit. It's like, let's stop and smell the roses. I think that's the figure of speech from my childhood. Smell the roses. Stop and smell the roses. I guess that's it. I was going to say the flowers, but I think it is roses. Probably different variations of that adage or that saying out where you're from. But we have to look around and say, okay, wow, this is a moon ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter's in Pisces. Venus is in Pisces. Both benefics there are together combining. And this is a beautiful, one of the few moons that will have this direct engagement via aspect and then the rulership of these benefics. So I think it's time to what has Jupiter and Pisces done? We've had it long enough. It's almost over. What's happening there? What awareness has increased? What actions were triggered by the awareness of Jupiter and Pisces with Venus, these benefics in Pisces? And here I want to mention the power of truth. Remember, Jupiter is it's a planet that implies divinity, right? Gods. The religion, God, all of those things come in with Jupiter. I was just reading, I'm reading this Philip K. Dick novel, The Transmigration of Timothy Arthur. And Timothy Archer, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. I think it's Transmigration, I'm pretty sure. I don't want to get it wrong. You guys know that watch this enough. When I say something that may be a little bit wrong, I just don't like to. I have to check it. But I believe it's the Transmigration of Timothy Arthur. And transmigration is the key word there that I just want to... Yeah, it's the Transmigration of Timothy Archer. So in the book, there's a whole section where this guy Timothy Archer, he's a bishop in the church, so very much Jupiter, right? But he's espousing on the Bhagavad Gita. And he mentions... I was just reading this and I was like, wow, this is perfect for this week. But he mentions there that Arjuna... So in the Bhagavad Gita, there's this character Arjuna, and his chariot, the guy that's basically his taxi driver, is really Krishna, the god Krishna, and an avatar. And there's a plot in the Bhagavad Gita, I've read it many years ago, but Krishna reveals his true nature to Arjuna. And it's absolutely terrifying. And Tim Archer in this novel is talking about how Krishna was delaying revelation out of fear that Arjuna couldn't take it, right? That it would be so terrifying. The true nature of God would terrify, right? Would shake someone to the core. To me, this is the perfect way to understand what Jupiter is and how Jupiter operates. Jupiter is not just piles of cash and parties. It's just not that. It's actually fundamental, profound, revelation, which can be extremely unnerving and extremely inversive, and kind of, contrary to what is settled, right? It's Jesus overthrowing the money changers on the temple, turning things over, turning the nature of things as they are, turning it over. So there's another line in that, shortly in this same little exposition, or this same little period where Timothy Archer's speaking, where he says some philosophers talk about change as being the only constant. And I think that's also perfect for the mutable signs here, Moon in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Pisces, these the dynamic change, truth revealing itself through change. How else could you access truth unless you turn things over? You get rid of the lies, right? You get rid of what's holding one back, and you reveal this kind of this truth, which can also often, like I said, be shocking, deep spiritual, profound truth. And so this is kind of what I want you to think about. Has Jupiter in Pisces been tough? What confrontations have you had with self? What, deeper kind of the tough pill that you've had to swallow about your life and about where you're going? But on the heels of that, the kind of rocket ships that can be fueled by these revelations. The only way out is through, but sometimes we have to understand the true nature. It's like, all right, listen, this is tough, right? There's a climb here that I'm seeing now for the first time. Wow, this is going to be a climb, but at least I know where I'm going. And so it can propel movement to have something revealed. And Sagittarius is a fire sign, so this Sagittarius moon, maybe there's actions that the Piscean pileup has now clarified for you and that you're already engaged in. This would be a time to appreciate Jupiter, appreciate these changes and the actions you're engaged in. So I say here the waning moon transit may assist in cutting the over-exuberance and clearing the mentality. This Piscean pileup has been strange. It's been tripped out. It's been discombobulating, and it's been kind of diffusive with Neptune there, now with Mars. It's kind of, this is one thing that I've also been thinking a lot about. It's overweight. It's out of balance, right? The sky is out of balance right now. 4 planets, 3 traditional here in Pisces. It's like weighing the table down. And that's not always an easy thing, but for the goal of kind of revelation, right? And so I just want to think that this Sag moon, maybe that we can get out with the fire and kind of burn away some things a little bit here, or clarify the passions, so that there's some kind of rebalancing potentially with this fire sign energy. By the time you get to this chart, this is really the only fire in the sky now too. I mean, you've got Chiron in Aries, but the 7 traditional, the sun has now moved into Taurus, and so we're left with no fire anymore. But this is kind of a way to maybe hold on to some of that heat here during this transit. So anyhow, this is what I think about this transit of the week. Thinking about it, preparing for eclipse season, contemplating the changes you've gone through with Jupiter and Pisces. And I'll say this, both the eclipses are ruled by planets in Pisces. The last full moon we had in Libra was ruled by a planet in Pisces. I think I said this last week, but the Pisces pileup is the major dominant theme of everything, that right now. And so it's one of the major dominant themes, if not the major dominant theme. All right, so let's come back. And what's Pisces? Change, shifting sands, revelations, challenging revelations, but ultimately for good. What are eclipses? The same thing, right? The hand of God coming into the reality, inverting and turning the world over on itself. Ultimately, I think for the nature of good, for the nature of purging. It's the purgative. All right, so let's move to the next chart. This is going to be Wednesday, 4:25 in the morning here in Central Europe. This actually, in chronological time, is before, I've got on my chronological order here. This is before the elected Sagittarius moon that I picked. But the moon does enter Sagittarius before the sun enters Taurus. But just know, so that chart I just showed you was later in the day on Wednesday at 10:46 in Central Europe, when the moon has moved into later degrees of Sagittarius, making aspects to Jupiter, closely applying to Jupiter in that chart. And in the moment that the sun enters Taurus, so this second chart, you will have the moon at 14 degrees of Sagittarius, so a little earlier. But let's just go here. This is Taurus season, right? A luscious first 2 weeks of Taurus season, because during the sun's time in Taurus, it will sextile Venus. It will sextile Venus in Pisces. And it's an exalted Venus. It's a powerful Venus. It's Jupiter in Pisces making sextiles to the sun in a position we like, overcoming. And so we've got Saturn is also squaring from Aquarius, dominating the sun. And this is, this configuration, we've talked about the 2-track sky a lot in the last few weeks. we still have it, Jupiter in Pisces, Saturn in Aquarius, the two great planets in their own domiciles dominating. And there's these two tracks. Maybe we can access the mutable truth of the revelatory change of these kind of spiritual Jupiterian changes on the one hand. But on the other hand, we've still got restriction and the implementation of new rule sets that Saturn has brought into our reality over the last 2 years. And those are like two horses that we can ride. They're in aversion, so maybe we need to pick up and be more Saturnine or be more kind of truth-oriented and more reflective and internalized at times. But these dual energies, while they're averse to each other, they aspect the eclipse both. And so the eclipses in Taurus and the planets in Taurus now incorporate both the Saturn and Jupiter. There's a bridge here in the sign of Taurus. It bridges Pisces and Aquarius by aspect. And so I kind of like that this eclipse season may be a way to integrate or come, to a deeper understanding of the different, you might say, irons that we've had in the fire, or the different, balls in the air, jugglers. Got a lot of balls in the air, a lot of matters that are in the air. My cliches, my adages, I'm pulling from things here that maybe it's not quite precise, so forgive me for that. But let's come back here. But this is the thing about eclipse season. The sun is in Taurus. All of these planets will be in Pisces for the first eclipse. All of the planets are now in the signs they will be in for that first eclipse. I think save Mercury. Let me double check that quickly. I think Mercury is still in Taurus for this first solar eclipse. Let's just make sure we double check that. Always got to double check, we make errors, and I've probably made many errors in these videos. So yeah, Mercury actually is in Gemini for that first eclipse. So except for Mercury, every piece is in place. And that's a whole interesting phenomenon. Mercury being in Gemini, sneaking into Gemini for the eclipses. It will be in Gemini for both eclipses. Maybe a hidden power of eclipse season is having Mercury in Gemini, and the powers that we can engage in with Mercury soon to be retrograde, right? It actually turns retrograde in between the eclipses. So let me see what I got on my next slide here about Taurus season. So the embedded pleasures of Taurus come against the fixed structures of Saturn's Aquarius. This is a Taurus season that is wonderful, right? The exalted Venus sextiling the sun for those first 2 weeks, this lovely exchange. But Saturn now says, hey, don't forget about me, and makes these squares. And so I wonder here about the unique obstacles related to the pressures between Taurus and Aquarius, right? They are square. It's pleasure, it's feeling, it's body in Taurus and wanting to stay with it, luxuriate, lay on the couch for hours, watch the TV, eat the potato chips, just chill, right? And not in a bad way, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, or drink the health elixirs and get the healthy massages, whatever that is, but it's luxuriation. And Saturn is something that's saying, no, don't luxuriate, get tough and get exact and precise. Remember the air sign ruled by Mercury, by triplicity, Aquarius is, and get kind of serious and disciplined about what you've committed to, and enforce those commitments upon yourself. And so they're very different energies. And delayed pleasure might be a way to go with this, putting things off, realizing that the true pleasures, these moments of being able to rest on the Taurian laurels, actually are created from the Saturnine and Aquarian periods of discipline and dynamism in terms of implementing things we need to implement for longer term goals and strategies. So all of these Venus-Saturn combinations can be in play, I think, but this isn't the kind of Taurus season where it's just pure luxuriation. And then you have the nodes there, right? Making it even more complicated with these themes, these sectors in play for upheaval from the gods, right? Krishna revealing himself to us. That's what eclipses might be about as well, right? It's an opening, it's a tear into the visual appearance of the sky, where then these things can come through. And we're not the same after eclipses. I mean, it's just, I've lived it and I've seen it in the lives of clients. The eclipses really do come to reveal again. And so those energies are also with the sun in Taurus. And so this isn't your kind of average or your sort of, basic Taurus season. It's very, very dynamic. I say that word all the time. I'll just keep saying it. Dynamic means change out of necessity. And that's what we might think about this Taurus season. So I think I'll leave it there with this Taurus season. Very, very interesting transits. And look for it to shift. Venus comes into Aries on, what is it, May? It's in early May. It's between eclipses. Venus will emerge into Aries. I'll get you the exact day here. It's like the 2nd of May, 1st, 2nd of May, depending on where you are. And so Venus enters Aries will very much change the sun. I think this first eclipse is a lot more, you'll have a lot more access to Venusian things as a part of the eclipse. Whereas that second eclipse, Venus in Aries, also ruled by Mars, and then that lunar eclipse is in Scorpio, ruled by the Mars. So it becomes much more martial after this first eclipse. So you might want to keep that in mind with your planning. Jupiter will be in Aries after the first eclipse. By the time we get to that second eclipse, it's a lot of Mars dominance in the sky, a Mars in Pisces. So, all right, let's move. What's this last chart that I've got here? This is Sunday, 1549 in Central Europe. We have Mercury squaring Saturn. And what I want to point out about this is the Mercury retrograde stories have likely already begun, because Mercury stations direct in Taurus. I think it's the 26 degrees Taurus later. And I think that's in early June, Mercury will station at 26 degrees Taurus. But Mercury, by the time it's squaring Saturn here on Sunday, is at 23 degrees Taurus. And the moon is right there in the moment of the square, at the moment of the square's perfection, activating the square, because the moon will be applying to Saturn. But the retrograde story is now emergent. So if you've had plans for business activity, for writing, thinking, releasing, let's say you missed those elections of last week and you're trying to sneak in a final election here, you might want to consider doing it before Mercury stations retrograde and before eclipse season begins. I think those Pisces moons next week are a potential opportunity. That'll be in the next week's video, this choice you'll have between Pisces moons and Aries moons in terms of what you want to do. You're gonna have a moon that's enclosed. It's not quite enclosed between Venus and Jupiter, because the rays of Mercury break up that enclosure, but the moon will apply to Venus and Pisces and apply to Venus and Jupiter next week. Some sweet Piscean, the final Piscean activation where you have the Venus-Jupiter co-presence in the moon there. But let's come back. That's next week's options. Let's not think about those now. What I have here, talking more about restriction, separation, isolation, staying with things, and how things aren't easy. So everything I just said about the nature of Taurus now as being not your most comfortable Taurus season, where our Taurian proclivity is being overcome by Saturn, being sort of controlled by this Saturn in the pivot position. Saturn, they're saying, hey, don't get too comfortable. Remember those commitments we've made. Remember the commitment you've made. If you have a committee in your head, some people say, I've got my committee, or however you talk to yourself. Remember what we did. Remember, I use I, by the way, just to clarify. I don't have a we in my brain. I have just, if I'm talking to myself, it's me or I. But not that it would be a problem if it was a we, but now we're talking about mercurial things, right? Multiple kind of selves or voices in terms of our inner dialogue. Very much Mercury, which is the planet of many Gemini, right? Rules Gemini, the double, but it also rules just a multiplicity of things and the shifting and changing between those various points on a multiplication or a multiplicity on a table on a multiplied selfhood, let's call that. Okay, come back. So talk more here about, so Mercury's communication is talking, and I love, like I said, that it's with the North Node, it's with Rahu, it's squaring Saturn. This Saturn and the nodal axis in Saturn are the reasons why this moment is so challenging and so dynamic, right? And so with Mercury, we can get a chance, I think, now to verbalize, communicate, find someone to talk with. I know this week for me, I was like messaging some friends, and do you have a friend? We all have that friend, right? That you can go to when you're at your lowest or when you're feeling kind of the most confused or something like this, that you can be more honest with this one friend, or hopefully a few that you've got. And so I did a little bit of that this week. It's just kind of writing this stuff. I wanted to articulate and verbalize some of the things I'm thinking and feeling. This is what I think the Mercury moments here can help us do, because even though Mercury is very, you might say harmed by Saturn, it is still out from the sun. It's still an evening star visible here in this chart. And so that gives it some strength. It is also being overcome by Jupiter and by Venus. Those sextiles are a factor of bonification for Mercury. So Mercury has support here as it goes through this gauntlet, you might say, of Rahu and Saturn, to be descriptive. All right, so talking can feel good. I love talking. I was just thinking about how much I love air signs because of how verbal they are. Hits my chart very well, but this kind of people that can verbalize. I just want to be around verbal people because it's nice. It's an energy release, There's a way to do it. Maybe if it's too much, it can be draining, but it just releases things in a way that I think I like and I prefer. So that's what I'm thinking about Mercury this week. I don't think I have much more to say about it other than get ready for the Mercury retrogrades. And if you've got things to do, we're now the waxing cycle was kind of the perfect time. But if you missed that, it's now kind of finding here before eclipse season these last moments to get things done. I think next week, if you're going to use that Sagittarius Moon, use it this week. That would be. And sometimes with moon transits, if you're not looking for an exact moment for action, just figure out when the moon is in the sign. So that's 19 April, Tuesday, 4:16 Central European Time, to 21 April, Thursday, 5:52 Central European Time. So that's basically Tuesday and Wednesday. Do your stuff this Tuesday and Wednesday. Next week, maybe do your stuff during that Aries moon or Pisces moon. I think the Aries moon might be the one that I like. We'll see. I'm going to think about it more and think about next week. But the point is, Mercury will be retrograding. This is a kind of final period here to get some stuff done. And I just want to remind you of that. Look, not that you can't get things done during eclipse season. Not that we're forced to do things. We're always forced to do things. But if there's more deliberate choices that you might need to make, it's this week and then next week before we hit the eclipse season and the Mercury retrograde. So Mercury, this is another way of saying, it's not in its shadow. People out there that know me know that I'm not much of a shadow person in terms of trying to work with retrogrades. But if you are, Mercury is out of shadow this week. It goes into shadow next week. Okay, let's get the final thing here. Let's pick the card. Let's clarify the moment with a card and try to understand the energy here. Finally, we've got a card to bring us into this moment of closure for this week's video. This is going to be here the Two of Clubs. One of my favorite cards actually in the whole of the tarot deck and the whole of the cartomancy deck. It's the Two of Clubs, the fire decan, the first decan of the zodiac in Aries. Mars's decan in Aries. Influence is what I call this card. But all kinds of tarologists and tarot writers, this card is known for kind of our power of our ability to go out into the world, to be initiatory, to act, to make change with our power, right? You've been given power. You can make change at the moment. You could press this video now, go make any kind of change wherever you are. You have that power. You can break things or destroy things. That would be, like, I guess, martial change, but you can initiate things and do things. We're extremely potent as human beings. And this card is a reminder of that. In terms of the sky right now, I mean, nothing is in Aries except the sun is in Aries now until Thursday, was it? No, let me get, it's until Tuesday. And the sun is in Aries until Tuesday at 4 in the morning. Or sorry, that's Wednesday, pardon me, till Wednesday at 4 in the morning. The sun is in Aries. So maybe this card is reminding us of that this exalted Aries sun, this fire sun, where we have this fire in the sky still and we can move and maneuver. think about using that. Think about using that. And maybe it's speaking to this Sagittarius moon. I know in those earlier degrees you get the squares to Mars, but maybe you wait for that square to perfect, and then you have those final moments of the sun in Aries with the moon in Sagittarius. You have that fire trine between the luminaries. Maybe that's a time to think about doing some things. Actually, maybe that's what this card is pointing us to. So the last thing, I mentioned Mars controls the sky for that second eclipse heavily. And maybe this is something to consider too. Just where is your power during eclipse season? It's so easy to give power away. How can we retain power during the dynamic kind of unfoldment of an eclipse season? Something to consider. All right, I'm going to end the video here. That was Weekly Tarot. That's Weekly Astrology. Thanks for being here. Have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you very soon. Peace.